But I can talk about lives turned 180 degrees around, and that might be the biggest miracle of them all. But to say that the shroud is that kind of divine, at least personally, I can't buy it. Had God believed on Jesus, excuse me, he was healed of his disease, he led the city to the Lord, Edessa became the first Christian city in the world. Well, it's still there. Today it's known as Urfa in south-central Turkey. The Eastern Orthodox Church calls it a holy city. They claim that they date their Christianity back to the time of Christ. There have always been monks and hermits living in caves and tombs around the place, just to be close to it. After Abgar died, his son Manu went back to the pagan gods. He proceeded to slaughter every Christian he could find. The cloth vanished. Apparently it was gone for about 200 years. Then somewhere around the year 300, there was a disastrous flood in south-central Turkey. Part of the city wall washed out. A rock fell out high above the west gate. There in a leather pouch or a bag was the cloth. Apparently somebody had bricked it into the city wall for safekeeping. It was worshipped. It was the prized relic of the entire church, to the extent that the emperor decided that it belonged to Byzantium. He sent an army to get it. It was easy. They were bigger. He welcomed the cloth to Constantinople. It hung there on the wall of a cathedral in what seems to have been a trellis-like frame until the year 1204. Now, there's really no way that we're going to ever prove this, but it does look rather good. Using X-ray fluorescence, we've been able to find every crease that anyone has ever placed in the cloth since the day it was woven, and refold it accordingly. If you follow one set of very deep-set creases, meaning that it had been folded that way for an awfully long time, 900 years, you get something like this. His head and shoulders, remarkably reminiscent of a mysterious relic that disappeared centuries ago, something that nobody in recorded history has ever seen, called the Mandelion. The face of Christ, which is supposed to have hung on the wall of a cathedral in Constantinople. We're not about to prove it, but it does look awfully good that the Shroud of Turin and the Mandelion were one and the same thing. 1204 was the year of the Fourth Crusade. That was the year that the Crusaders breached the walls of Constantinople and sacked the city, stripping it. Ian found a letter written by a French crusader, writing home, "I have seen the Sidwan, the burial cloth of our Lord." Not much of a peg. Another letter, "The Sidwan has disappeared, and neither Frenchman nor Greek knows its whereabouts." And that's all. But they put together a case that will hold water in virtually any court of law in the world. One of the armies sacking Constantinople were the Knights Templar, dealers in religious relics, unbelievably secretive. They wouldn't give you the time of day if they had any choice in the matter. Immensely wealthy, without question the wealthiest people in the world. They had built castles all over Europe and the Middle East just to house their money. Ultimately, this is what destroyed them. They were also perfectly capable of stealing anything they wanted if they wanted it badly enough. And it's perfectly easy to imagine a crusader finding the cloth hanging on the wall, literally ripping it off, shoved under a leather jerkin. It's on its way to France. Circumstantial. But around the year 1300, the Templars were in awfully big trouble. That money of theirs was driving the King of France right out of his mind. They had more than him. And somewhere there's an unwritten law that no one should have more money than the king. All he needed was half an excuse to get it. He got that excuse when the rumor went around France that the Templars were idolatrous. They were worshiping a face, the face of a bearded man on a cloth. I'm not certain that anyone has ever proven that the king made any real attempt to find it. He didn't want it, he didn't need it, he couldn't have cared less. He had what he wanted. He got the money, not without a good scrap, but he got it. He pulled a pre-dawn raid that would have made Hitler proud of him. Rounded up every Grand Master of the Templars, he burned them all alive at the stake for idolatry. Every man died protesting his innocence at least to idolatry, but he died. The last one to go up in the flames was a man named Geoffrey de Charnay, the first Earl of Chambray. Within a very few years after he died in the flames, the second Earl, also Geoffrey, placed the Shroud of Turin on public display. Since then, Roman Catholic record-keeping is phenomenal. They can almost tell you the name of every individual who's even looked at this cloth for almost 700 years, proving beyond the point of argument, whatever this is, however that image came to be imprinted on it, it very definitely happened before 1352. Not too long ago, while renovating a castle in England, a place in Somerset called Templecombe, the home of the Knights Templar in England, found a board with his face on it, dating back to Templar days. They had it. However they may have gotten it, the Knights Templar had it. At the same time that John and Ian had been doing their thing in England, and they weren't alone. In Zurich, until he died about a year ago, was a botanist by the name of Max Frey. Possibly half of us here tonight are old enough to remember the name. It was on the front page of every newspaper in the world a while back. Max headed up the commission of criminologists that investigated Dag Hammarskjöld's death. That's what he was, a criminologist, working for the police departments all over Europe, special consultant to the UN, the kind of a man that would take a dust sampling off of your clothes, tell you where you went, what you did, and the other person's first name. He was positively dangerous. He saw a highly enhanced photograph of the cloth. He saw what he thought was pollen caught in the weave, and that was Max's field. Pollen, you probably know, is just as identifiable as your fingerprint. There are no two types of plants producing a pollen that's even slightly similar. If you find pollen, you know what kind of a plant it came from. If you know where that plant grows, you know where the object has been. It's that simple. We've got pollen caught in the weave of every item of clothing we have on tonight that's been exposed to the open air. It's microscopic, but you're not going to get it out by washing it or dry cleaning it. It's there. If you're smart, you keep it away from people like Max. They might tell you too much about yourself. It's almost a literal miracle that in '72 he asked for and he got permission to take a dust sampling off the cloth. He identified some 28 types of pollen in that first sample. It was no tremendous surprise to anybody that the first one he definitely tied down was a type of beech growing exclusively in northern and central Europe. Big deal. The cloth turned up in France. He found pollen from plants that grow nowhere in the world but Italy. It's been in Torino since the 1400s. He found 8 types of pollen from plants that grow nowhere in the world but southern and central Turkey, in the area around Constantinople, proving that France is not where the cloth originated. And maybe, just maybe, Eusebius wasn't the bull artist they've been calling him for so many centuries. It could very well be that he knew exactly what he was writing about back in the year 300. Then Max turned up 9 types of pollen that couldn't be identified in any textbook on botany, and he was supposed to have owned them all. He said it's not unusual that there are a large number of unimportant, unclassified plants. He called it an educated guess. I can't copy the German accent. You go to where maybe the cloth was. A quick flight to Israel, a walking tour of Judea with his glass, and Max found what he wanted. I'm quoting him. Desert plants that grow nowhere in the world but southern Israel, in the area around Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. In my professional opinion, at some time in its history, this cloth has been exposed to the open air in Italy, France, southern or central Turkey, and southern Israel, in the area around Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. Since then, several more samplings, a lot more pollen. They fill in the gaps, they tie it all together a lot tighter. But then, sitting with his microscope in his living room in Zurich, he did what never crossed anybody's mind. It was strictly a bonus, a gift. Max had taken the cloth backward in time 1,000 years. He had found fossilized pollen from plants that had been known to be extinct since the early centuries. Again, showing rather conclusively that the cloth has got to be at least a full 1,000 years older than its own recorded history. While these men and women, there have been many, have been doing their thing all over Europe and the Middle East, in this country the work is scientific. I suppose that's because that's the way we think, that's where our money is, and that's where the people are that got drafted for the job. And there's no 2 people on this team ever get together in the world anymore without the question coming up almost immediately. Why now? Why us? You see, almost nobody wanted anything to do with it. In 1978, the mildest thing I called the Shroud of Turin was garbage. When Dr. Demihala called and asked me if I wanted to get involved with him in the work that was about to start, I asked Tom if his brain melted. Thought I was clever. He's a nuclear physicist. I said, "You're crazy. You've gone stark raving." He didn't think it was funny. He said, "You've gone stark raving mad. It couldn't possibly be real. Even if it is real, what's it good for?" Well, thank God Tom didn't listen to me. Maybe that's why he's a presidential advisor and I'm not. That's also spelled, if you didn't realize it, S-T-U-P-I-D. I'd made up my mind before I knew anything about it. Preconceived opinions, one of the dumbest things anyone can possibly do, to make a judgment before you know anything. But I did it, so I can't say anything. As I said, thank God they didn't listen to me. I came in on his coattails, kicking, screaming, and maybe even using a little Old Testament language. But I quickly found out that virtually everyone else agreed with me. With the exception of only a few men from Rome, really all anyone wanted to know was who did it and how. The how part is still extremely intriguing.